Well, you heard the boss. Worthless slaves, let's sit down. That's cold, isn't it? That's harsh. And unfortunately, because of the liturgical scholars who set up the lectionary for readings, have split this in half so that you only get this first half this week. You don't see where this is going. I do, because I've already worked on next week's sermon. I can't adequately preach right now without giving away next week. So you're just going to have to come back or actually read the Thursday reflection, and you're going to see how it fits together. And it fits together much better than you think. But it's not a matter of talking my way around it. It is exactly what he said with a purpose. A purpose. Last night I preached what you're about to hear, and I went into St. Paul's knowing, as I have for the last, about 11 or 12 days, totally unsatisfied with what this sermon was going to be like. And I was annoyed and growled at a couple of people and completely annoyed at the message that I tried to get across. Then came home, and around 9 o'clock, an email from one of the people who were there saying that was one of the best sermons you've ever given. You touched my heart. How did you know what I needed to hear? So I've given up trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. If this touches you, I hope it does. People would ask Jesus a question. He would answer it not by answering the question, but by telling a story. And this is a story about something I know very little about. Two things I know very little about. I know very little about mustard, and I know very little about atomic energy. But I'm going to show you how they fit together, at least as it was once explained to me by a priest who was a much better preacher and a much smarter scholar than I could ever hope to be. I knew nothing about mustard until I became a theological student. Hot dogs were forbidden in my home. My mother had these horror stories about how sausage and hot dogs were made. You're shaking your head. I don't care if it's true. I didn't need to hear that when I was 7 and 8. You know, that's just too much information. As a result, mustard was something we hardly ever saw. I knew nothing. I knew it had a yellow color, but other than that, I knew nothing as a kid. Mustard was what you got to put on the hot dog, which you never told your mother about when Uncle Frank and Dad took you to Shea Stadium. Okay? Took me a while to figure out that there was some truth to this, that the mustard seed is so tiny. Is it the tiniest of all seeds? No. But it is really, really tiny as a spice. The second thing we don't get in all of this, and I'm going to get to that tininess in a second, is reading the scriptures has a built-in problem with it that you and I just cannot get over. And it's the same problem as when you read someone's email. Rather than talking to the person one-on-one, you don't get tone of voice. You don't get inflection. You don't know when something is being said with kindness, when something is being said in a snarky fashion, when the question marks go up. Forget about punctuation, because punctuation didn't exist in the ancient world. We, 19th and 20th and 21st century people, create punctuation. So is it a question? Is it an exclamation? We don't have the context because we weren't there. So we don't get the hint of whether he's criticizing them or posing a question to them or trying to guide them. Which now brings me to my third point. And it's something I know very little about. I know there is a difference between nuclear fusion and nuclear fission. I remember studying it once upon a time. I also remember I didn't get it right. But I think it goes something like this, and bear me out, and if I'm wrong, you can correct me after the sermon is over, okay? From my understanding, the bombs, the weapons we have created, sadly, unfortunately, they are the product of nuclear fission, where the atom is split. The atom splits, it costs a fortune to do, it creates this incredible amount of dangerous, destructive, absolutely uncontrollable power. And in the words of the great saint of the 60s, what is war used for? What is war used for? Absolutely nothing. As opposed to nuclear fission, which basically you take something... Fusion, thank you. Nuclear fusion doesn't use uranium, uses the hydrogen atom. Now, you guys in high school, you're going to have to correct me on this. Back in the Stone Age, when I took the dinosaur to school, hydrogen was the first element on the element chart. Is it still there, or has it been replaced by something else?
Who knows?
Say yes and get off the hook. They don't know squat, okay? They have no idea. You know?
True.
You gotta learn to bluff better, man, because you better never play cards for money. I'm warning you now. Okay? But the idea, the hydrogen atom, energy is added to it, and the power that comes out from it is the power of nuclear energy that actually works. Because it's a combining of things, not a splitting apart. This is about faith. And I'm going to make this connection, not because I've invented this, but because I was taught this once. Faith is not just something that's measurable as if you were putting milk in a milk bottle. It's not quantifiable. But faith is something we have all been given. It is something the Lord gives us as virtue, and it's something we have to respond to. It's connected two ways. It is activated, like the tiniest particle of hydrogen. And what activates it is the power of the Holy Spirit, the power of grace. When the others say to him, Lord, increase our faith, it's as if Jesus is saying to them, I'm not going to increase it. You already have it. It's there. Open your eyes. Open your heart. Let God's Spirit work through you. And that faith will manifest itself in ways much greater than you could possibly ever imagine. In the times of challenge, in the seasons of suffering and change, when we want to roll our eyes to the heaven and simply say, I can't do this anymore. I don't have it on my own. And Jesus is saying, right, you don't have that power on your own, but you do have that power. It's within you. Increase our faith. You have that power. What does Jesus say, the greatest commandment? Love of God above all things, love your neighbor as yourself, love one another as I have loved you. You know what? On our own, there's not one person sitting or standing in this room who's capable of that. We all fall flat. But with the power of the Holy Spirit increasing our faith, we are capable of it. Because we're not doing it alone. When we come on Sundays or Saturday evenings, and you partake of something so small and insignificant, a little tiny morsel of bread, a little tiny sip of wine, the presence of Jesus in the sacramental presence of the Eucharist, that tiny bit is just a hint of what God gives us in terms of power. It's there. It's given to us. Increase our faith. For all the world, you hold in your hand something utterly powerless and insignificant, and guess what? You could move a mountain with it if you opened your heart, if you would believe. Come to God's table hungry. Come looking for meaning. Come to the altar and ask a question, or an exclamation point, or a request. Lord, increase our faith, and he will answer. Amen.
Amen.